Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. Before we start the interview, I'd like to offer you a gift. I work with many queer folks who struggle with self-esteem, self-acceptance, and confidence. And I get it. Growing up queer is no cakewalk. Living in a world filled with homophobia and oppression can take its toll. Having the strength to be true to yourself can be a challenge, but you can change that. So, if you'd like support taking the first few steps, head over to my website and grab your free copy of The Self-Confident Queer. Just go to queerhealingjourneys.com/confident. This guide will walk you through 3 simple steps to help you begin to build your self-worth and confidence today. So head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/confident and download your free guide today. Okay, now on with the show. My guest today is Dr. Rehan Lakhani. Dr. Rehan is a naturopathic doctor in Ontario, Canada. He focuses on treating mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression by reducing systemic inflammation and optimizing the gut-brain axis. His treatments address the root cause of illness and include diet and lifestyle changes, orthomolecular medicine, botanical medicine, and more. Today, Rehan helps us understand the connection between our mental health, gut health, and nutrition. We talk about the ways that modern diets and lifestyle are detrimental to our overall health and steps we can take to improve it and reduce anxiety. Find Dr. Rehan at georgianintegrative.com. That's GEORGIAN integrative.com. Hi, Rehan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here because I know that you work with a lot of folks who struggle with anxiety, but more from a naturopathic medicine perspective. And I also work with a lot of folks with anxiety. And I know that a lot of queer folks out there really struggle with anxiety. So I'm jazzed to dive deep into this topic. But before we go there, I wonder if you can just share with us a little bit about what naturopathic medicine is for people who may not know or have a little bit confusion about what exactly it is.
Yep. That's a great question. Naturopathic medicine is a model of healthcare. It's a primary care model that basically uses assessments like your medical doctor would. So the Western medical model, they use the same assessments. And then what we do is once those assessments are made, so by assessments, I mean, physical exams, interviewing patients about their symptoms, physical assessments as well, blood tests, that sort of thing. All of those assessments are basically the same in naturopathic medicine. After those assessments are done, our treatments are where we differ. So our treatments primarily revolve around, number one, finding the root cause of disease. So addressing it upstream rather than addressing symptoms. And number two, addressing it in a very holistic way using natural treatments. So things like lifestyle medicine, things like habit change, things like diet, nutrition, supplementation, botanical medicine, acupuncture, and Chinese medicine. So all of those treatment modalities are what we use to address that root cause. And while we're addressing that root cause, also help patients with the symptoms that they're experiencing too, so that they get immediate relief while we're working on addressing that root cause as well.
Now, you used a term that I haven't heard before, and I can make some assumptions about it, but you said lifestyle medicine. What exactly is that?
Lifestyle medicine, I'm sure different practitioners have different understandings of it, but to me, it's adapting your lifestyle to your health goals. So let's take anxiety, for example, and, someone is having a difficult time sleeping, falling asleep, staying asleep, whatever it may be. What we can do is adjust their lifestyle so that we can improve their quality of sleep, which then in turn helps their anxiety. So by sleep, I mean incorporating sleep hygiene techniques, sleep restriction therapy, maybe assessing for sleep apnea and making sure that that's not an issue. So that's what I mean by lifestyle medicine is habit changes that when incorporated in an intentional way and in a step-by-step way, a systemic way, they end up making large changes in someone's lifestyle and well-being, end up addressing that root cause of the condition that they're experiencing.
And what inspired you to first become a naturopathic doctor?
Truthfully, my upbringing, so both of my parents are Indian. I'm like half Indian, half Pakistani. I was born in Pakistan. And so our upbringing was always around how do we, number one, stay healthy using food? And number two, how, if one of us gets sick, how do we treat that at home first using food or herbs or Ayurvedic medicine? That was a big thing as well. How do we use those things before we have to go to the doctor, or do we even have to go to the doctor once those things have been used and implemented? So my upbringing was always around it. And so my interest in health and fitness evolved from there. My first job out of school, not even out of school, in high school, actually, I was doing part-time personal training while I was in high school and started my own business doing that. Then I went into nutrition consulting, and now I'm a naturopathic doctor. So it's always been, the path that I wanted to follow.
Yeah, yeah. And Ayurveda is sort of the Indian version of naturopathic medicine, at least the closest we could refer to it here in the West, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's very similar to Chinese medicine in that it's thousands of years old and has been evolved over so much time and so many people. And we have so many, case studies and historical anecdotal evidence behind it. And now the research is catching up to it.
And how did you come to start focusing on anxiety in your practice, which I imagine might be a little different than maybe some of other naturopathic doctors who maybe don't think of the psychological and emotional aspects of physical health in that way?
Yeah, definitely. So, having said what my background is, being in personal training and nutrition, what I focused on at the beginning, at the start of my naturopathic medical practice, is actually cardiovascular disease and weight loss. That's what my focus was initially. And the more I saw these patients, the more I had experience with their stories and what they had in terms of conditions and symptoms, the more I realized when you get to that root cause, it ends up being chronic stress and anxiety that's driving the factors for metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, weight gain, weight management. So at that point, I said, my philosophy is addressing the root cause of disease. I'm just going to work upstream and start addressing anxiety for what it is. And the more I looked into that, the more I researched into it, the more the connection between anxiety and digestive health came up. And so the anxiety and gut health piece came up. And so that's what I focus my practice on now.
Mm-hmm. So what is the connection between anxiety or just mental health in general and our nutrition and the gut? I mean, I've heard and I know a little bit about the gut-brain connection and how people talk about that, but can you elaborate on that for us a little bit? Help us understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically a feedback loop. So your brain will communicate with your gut, which then communicates with your brain, and then so on, the cycle continues. Now, nutrition has a huge role to play in our mental health. In my opinion, it's very, very understated in medical practice today. It's a cornerstone of our physical health. So it's really, almost foolish of us to think that it's not a cornerstone of our mental health as well. It really is. It impacts mental health so much. The way that we eat, what we eat, how we eat, all of those things impact our neurotransmitters, our hormones, which can then impact our mental health and our mood as well. Food makes us feel a certain way, and it does that by the release of certain hormones and neurotransmitters. And I'll give you, a really interesting example from a study that I was reading. So we all know that sugar is addictive, right? When we have a highly processed, refined food that is high in sugar content, chocolate bar, let's say, our dopamine spikes. So that dopamine is that pleasurable neurotransmitter that's like, yes, I feel good now after I had this delicious chocolate bar. So dopamine spikes. And so this is our food and our nutrition playing a direct role in what's going on in our brain. And what's happening now with the standard North American diet, we have, and this is just an example with sugar, we have sugar hidden in a lot of things that are quote unquote healthy. And so one of the mechanisms by way the gut and the brain communicate is through something called the vagus nerve. And so let's say, using this sugar example again, let's say you pick up a salad dressing at the grocery store and it's got a green label. It looks good. It looks healthy. And you take it home and you have this salad dressing with your salad thinking, yeah, I'm having a great healthy meal. This is great for my mood, my mental health, my physical health. Turns out that salad dressing has a ton of hidden sugar in it. Now, with our taste buds, we don't recognize that. We don't recognize that we've consumed a bunch of sugar. But what happens is when that salad dressing goes into the gut, the vagus nerve, which connects to your brain, your gut, your heart, your immune system. The vagus nerve picks up on that sugar and says, hey, brain, there's some sugar here. We should release some dopamine. And so that pattern of addiction occurs without you even knowing it. And that's just one small example with sugar in terms of how your brain and your gut communicate with each other to, again, release neurotransmitters, change your hormonal profile, and over the long term, impact certain cycles in the body, like your hormone cycles, your circadian rhythm, your cortisol cycles, all of that.
Yeah, sugar is pretty much everywhere. I know when I started looking for it, and I started, especially, salad dressing's a really good example of one of those. It's just like, I'd go to some place like a salad bar or something like that, and I'm just like, well, that's honey mustard, or, this other thing, or even something that you wouldn't normally think is sweet. They've started sweetening them and just, hiding sugar in there. And I think there's a way in which our taste buds have sort of been molded to crave that. And so we sort of look for that and so they put it in there, and then it just creates this loop of like, we want that and we're going to give it to you, right? Yeah. So what are some of the simple changes that some people who maybe can just start to do to maybe explore to see if starting to make some baby step changes could have some effects on their mental health that they could do based on their diet or some of these lifestyle changes that you mentioned?
Right. So when I work with patients, the first thing I get them to do is to get a baseline assessment. So where are you at right now? Because we don't know where we need to go unless we know where you're at right now. So one of the most simple things that you can do is create awareness around your food and nutrition patterns right now. And the simplest way to do that is literally to print out a chart. You can look up nutrition log on Google and it'll come up with a PDF. Just print that out and just write down the gist of what you've had every day for about a week, including how much water you've had, how much, juice, pop, other beverages you've had, how many alcoholic drinks you've had. Let's just track it. No judgment, no shame around it whatsoever. Let's just track it to see where you're at right now. And then once you've got an idea of where your baseline is, then you can start making those baby steps and those adjustments to make sure that you're moving in the direction of your health goals, whatever they may be. So if you've recognized that I get this dip at around 3:00 in the afternoon and I really crave the banana bread that Sally's brought in at work, it's sitting in the kitchen right now. And that's something that you've noticed as a pattern now. You've recognized it's a pattern. And now instead of it being subconscious and your drives, your cravings driving you to consume this food, now you're aware of it. And now you can start making slow changes to it. So maybe you don't have a whole slice of banana bread. Maybe you have just half for a week. The week after that, maybe you just have a quarter. The week after that, I don't know how many times Sally bakes this banana bread, but but maybe, after a week of having a quarter, you slow down and maybe you switch to something else like an apple. So really small, gradual changes are what work long-term, and they are what's sustainable. It's a different story when you track your nutrition and you say, oh my gosh, this is not the best. So I'm going to start a keto diet tomorrow and start going to the gym at 6 a.m. That's not sustainable. It's not in any way doable for the long term. It's too drastic. So start by assessing a baseline, tracking where you're at right now, and then slowly start adjusting where you think you need to adjust based on the patterns that you've noticed, and then go from there. And sometimes you just need to ask for help, right? If you need to work with a professional, you need to work with a professional, and recognizing and acknowledging that and then asking for help is also another thing that you can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know recently you post on social media about how people who follow a vegan or vegetarian diets are missing a lot of important nutrients for mental health. But it also sounds like you have a solution for that where they don't have to change their diet necessarily by, going against their values or the guidelines that they have, but there are other ways of doing that. Is that right?
Yep. I know it's controversial to say that because people are following certain diets for different reasons. And there's, again, no judgment, no shame around that whatsoever. What my job is I want to make sure that you are getting the nutrients that you need to support good, thriving mental health while still maintaining a diet that you prefer maintaining. So whether it be vegan, vegetarian, whatever it may be, I just want to make sure that, maybe we need to use supplementation in addition to your diet to make sure you're getting, let's say, the B vitamins that you need so that you maintain good mental health and your body is able to take those vitamins that you're consuming now from supplements and make those neurotransmitters that you need that we know is so important or are so important for good mental health.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know if working with people like that who follow a vegan or vegetarian diet, if you've noticed a particular like flavor of anxiety or a particular snapshot of their psychological wellness that maybe people may be able to hear and say, oh yeah, I do follow that diet and I do kind of feel that way sometimes. Maybe it's lack of these certain nutrients that are causing me to feel this way.
Yeah, that's a tough one to identify because everyone's body will manifest it differently. So even if you and I are on the same diet, anxiety will look different for me than it does for you. One pattern that I have noticed, however, is with women, so particularly women in their reproductive years, the impact of vegan vegetarian diet can really manifest as higher symptoms of anxiety just before menses, just before their period. Mm-hmm. Sometimes going into and during as well, but just before there's a heightened period of irritability, anxiety, panic attacks even. And so that's one pattern that I have noticed. But aside from that, depending on the person, it can look different for everyone based on their own individual biological makeup.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. And are there ways that our modern day society or technology is detrimental to our mental health that you've seen in the patients that you work with?
Yes.
Aside from diet that we've talked about so far?
Well, yeah, the standard North American diet, processed foods, all of that has a huge role to play. But the other big pieces of the puzzle are screens. Of course, we know that. So screens, the overuse of screens impact our circadian rhythm, but also our cortisol cycles. So normally our cortisol is completely normal. It's a hormone we need to live to survive. But the normal cycle of cortisol is higher in the morning. So you feel alert, awake, rested. And then it starts to dip throughout the day until it gets to about 3 p.m. So that's where it's kind of in the mid range. Then it dips even more. So around between 7 to 9, it dips even more significantly so that you're able to get to bed. You're able to start producing melatonin in the body. You're able to relax, wind down. You're able to fall asleep easily. And then throughout the evening, it stays low until, the early hours of the morning when it starts rising again until it peaks when you wake up in the morning period. So that's the normal cortisol cycle. Now, when you introduce something like screens first thing in the morning or screens lasting at night, screens all throughout the day, it can really dysregulate that cycle significantly. So along with the circadian rhythm too. But that's something that, we know screens impact our circadian rhythm. So, to give you an example, someone who is, let's say, is completely overworked in the burnout stage, has been using screens for a long period of time. And by a long period of time, I mean years. At that point, if you were to measure what their cortisol cycle looks like throughout the day, depending on their symptoms, it could be completely low, completely flatlined. So there's no cycle at all. It's just flatlined. Or it could be all over the place. And when it's all over the place, I'll notice patients saying things like, I just wake up in the middle of the night, startled, wide awake, and I can't go back to sleep. Or the other thing you'll notice is I can't fall asleep at night. That's when my mind starts racing. That's when I'm like really wide awake and I just cannot fall asleep at night. And that's telling me, oh, maybe that cortisol is too high at that time when it's supposed to be low. So screens in that way and overwork, right? Like we wear busyness and overwork as a badge of honor in our society. And that's not necessarily a good thing. That's something that humans are not meant to do. We're not adapted to do that. And so between the screens piece, between the overwork and the chronic stress that we experience from all aspects of life, including our work, our relationships, everything, that's a big burden that modern day society has on our mental health. Big, big burden. And I think, the last piece too is environmental contaminants. So we're exposed to a lot more chemicals than we were previously, and that can result in the dysregulation of hormones, particularly estrogen and testosterone, which then can contribute to a variety of different conditions, but including anxiety and other mood disorders.
So going back to the cortisol thing, I imagine that a sudden spike in cortisol, like in the middle of the night or in the middle of a Saturday afternoon when you're just hanging out with your friends, people might mistake that, or it might trigger a panic attack or an anxiety attack. And people are like, oh, I'm having an anxiety attack. Something must be wrong. So, what do I do? And then maybe the first thing they do to help distract themselves as they turn to a screen, right? So I can see how it can be a little bit of a mystery and confusing. So I'm curious, if people were to follow, the gold standard of your recommendations around screen time, what would be the ideal window that you would recommend?
So most people, from what I see, are using screens for work of some sort. So they need to use them for a certain amount of time during the day. So in that case, what we would do is just use strategies to mitigate the effects of your screen. So what I would recommend in a case where someone is exposed to a screen for 6, 7 hours a day, sometimes even 8 hours a day, and then they go home and watch TV some more, so they're exposed at night too. What I would recommend is first thing in the morning when the sun comes up, just go and expose your eyes to the sunlight for about 10 minutes. I mean, don't look at the sun, but stand outside, look at the trees, and just be in that sunlight without sunglasses or glasses on. And at least 10 minutes. If you can do half an hour, great, but at least 10 minutes, just get that sunlight in so that you're sending a signal and a message to your brain saying, hey, sun's coming up, it's morning time, let's reduce the melatonin, let's get that cortisol regulated so it's a little bit higher in the morning. Then they go on with their regularly planned day, going to work, looking at screens if they have to, going on their phone, etc. Once they've done what they've had to do with screens, so let's say they're ending their workday around 4 or 5 at night or in the afternoon, then what we want to do is limit it as much as possible, which is difficult because a lot of us, like you said, we distract ourselves with television, with our phones, through scrolling, everything. So it's a little bit difficult, but this is where those behavioral habitual changes come into play. And a lot of my job is to be a coach for those behavioral changes. How do you do them in a way that's sustainable and that you don't feel like you're not really living your life the way you want to live your life? So limit it as much as possible in the evening, but especially after 7 p.m. So 7 p.m. is when our melatonin starts to rise. So our body will send pulses of melatonin starting at 7:30, sometimes 8 for people. And every hour and a half, you'll get this pulse of just tiredness. I don't know if you've noticed this for yourself. I definitely notice it at night where I get these pulses of just, wow, I'd like fall asleep right now. So you'll get these pulses of melatonin. And when you're looking at a screen at night, those pulses become dysregulated. So your melatonin gets confused. Your brain gets confused and says, okay, it might be daylight outside because I'm seeing blue light right now. And so I won't produce that much melatonin. So especially after 7 p.m., stay away from screens as much as possible. If you can, install some red lights in your house instead of the regular LED pot lights, get some red lights going at that time. But if you don't want to do all of that, what you can do is get those blue light blocking glasses and use those after 7 p.m. Now, closer towards bedtime, an hour before bedtime, you want to stay away from screens for sure. Blue light glasses or not, just keep those screens away from your bedroom, from your hour before bed, and do something relaxing like a wind down routine. So a book, a tea, a bath, playing with your pets, whatever it may be, some sort of wind down routine so that you can get back into a lower state of cortisol, higher melatonin, and get to sleep easier and stay asleep for longer and get a restful sleep.
Yeah, I like to recommend people to do something like you said, like a bath or a shower or something like that. And, light some candles. Like candlelight is a nice sort of soft, low light.
Absolutely.
That is nice to sort of get yourself to start to wind down.
Yeah.
Do you have any other preventative tips in general just for mental health that we might follow, especially for people struggling with anxiety?
Yeah. So if I can just, recommend a few things, screens would be one of them, right? That candlelight actually is a great example. If you don't want to install red lights in your house, you can just use candlelight. That's great. But staying away from screens after that 7 p.m. period would be incredibly beneficial for your hormones to regulate again, for your cortisol to regulate again. And remember, cortisol interacts with all of your other hormones too. So by regulating cortisol, you're regulating everything else too. Going back to some of the nutrition points that I mentioned earlier, having a whole foods, plant-based, that doesn't mean vegan or vegetarian for those who don't want to follow that, but whole foods, plant-based diet, and things that are generally made by you or found in nature, right? So you don't want to indulge in any processed foods, any processed refined foods on a regular basis. But I also live by the 80-20 rule. That's what I tell my patients too. There are times where you just want to go out and have fun with your friends and family, and that's okay. as long as 80% of the time, you're able to follow this whole foods, plant-based diet and incorporate everything that you need in terms of a nutrition standpoint. So that's another thing I would say. I'm looking at a tree right now. So another preventative thing is going outdoors and being outside in greenery. We've seen a lot of research come out on forest bathing and getting out into greenery and forests, even in the wintertime. So I'm in Canada. So even in the wintertime, there is a huge benefit of going out into these forests, because some of the research says that there are literally chemicals released by these plants, these trees, shrubs, etc., that have a calming effect when they're inhaled through the nose. They go into your brain. They have a calming effect on your brain. And so that creates a very good relaxing effect that can be used preventatively, especially if you do it frequently. So, I try to go out for a hike every day if I can and get the benefit of that. And then lastly, some sort of mindfulness practice. And I'm sure you probably, work with your clients on this as well. So some sort of mindfulness practice, whether it be actual meditation, whether it be prayer, whether it be journaling, walking through a forest, exercising, whatever it may be. That's something that I would recommend too. And on that note, exercise can sometimes contribute to anxiety too. And so being mindful of the type of exercise that you're doing and making sure that it's not worsening anxiety or causing panic attacks. That's another preventative tactic that you can use.
What are some of those kinds of anxiety that can increase the possibility of anxiety?
Yeah, so some of the exercises that can increase anxiety is really strenuous or endurance-based exercises. So something like weight training every single day for an hour and a half at your maximum capacity, that's something that I would be very careful of. Something like endurance running, marathon running, I would be very careful of that too. So those exercises, again, they impact our hormones. So going back to that cortisol example, a lot of my patients actually notice that when they do high intensity exercise, they get a panic attack. And that's because your cortisol is up. You're basically mimicking the exact symptoms of a panic attack, the fast heart rate, the temperature raised, the red and sweaty face. So it actually triggers a panic attack for them. So being very mindful of the types of exercises you're doing and making sure that those exercises aren't further dysregulating your cortisol, but actually are helping to regulate it is what you need to do. In my patients, what I generally recommend is for a period of about 2 months, just do walks, yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, Qigong, that sort of thing first for the first 2 months until we get those hormones regulated again. And then you can hop back into your strength training routine, your running routine, knowing that you can recognize the signs and symptoms in your body of increased anxiety or inducing a panic attack.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that something like bike riding, it just depends on how intense you're riding your bike too. So maybe like, as you were saying, riding your bike intensely for over an hour may not be good, but maybe a leisurely bike ride through the neighborhood would be okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly it.
So, Rehan, I wonder if you can share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit and maybe your mental health and physical health to flourish.
I'd have to say a person. So my partner, Siobhan, has been very supportive of me and has been for the last almost 11 years now. And so going through everything that I've been through, she's been there through all of the difficult conversations with family, through all of the procedures that I've had to go through all of the, the small changes too. Like I'm a trans man. So for the audience who doesn't know, so even the small changes like growing beard hairs. So some of those small changes, she's been very supportive of that. And so I think she's been very critical in my, journey to where I am today.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yes. I think that having loving, supportive people in our life are very helpful for our mental health too.
There you go. Yeah, there's another preventative tactic.
Yeah. So where can people find you and learn more about your work and some of your tidbits of wisdom that you share?
So I'm on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram and on Facebook using the same handle. It's at dr for doctor .rehan, REHAN .ND for naturopathic doctor. So I'm there. You can also email me at rehan@georgianintegrative.com. And I think this is in the show notes.
Yep.
So you'll get the spelling of that there.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the best ways to reach me.
Okay, great. And I believe that you have like a free handout about anxiety and the gut-brain connection and that kind of thing. Yeah?
Yep. So I've got a handout that talks about the different types of foods that you can start incorporating into your diet if you wanted to start, addressing mental health preventatively. And you can find that from a link on my Instagram bio, actually.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dr. Rehan, for being here and sharing all of this about our physical health and our diet and nutrition and its connection to anxiety and mental health. I think it's been very helpful for all of us. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick.
To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. And if you enjoyed the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. This will help us reach and support more queer people all over. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.